My name is Danielle Lorion. I'm an account director at InkHouse, and I'm joined today with Kathleen McNerney. She's the senior producer and editor of WBUR's Edify, which covers education in Boston and beyond, and WBUR is Boston's NPR station. So Kathleen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So we're going to talk today about your education coverage, how this has obviously changed during COVID-19, what your team is focusing on and reporting. But, right out of the bat, I'd love to hear just in a nutshell about your beat and what you are currently working on right now and even pre-COVID-19.
Yeah, I actually had to go and look back because it felt like forever ago that we weren't steeped in all of this. So there are, I'm one of a 3-person team, and we have a general assignment reporter who does part politics, part higher ed. So there's 3.5 of us doing education. We primarily focus on Massachusetts or New England regional. And we do everything from preschool to postdoc. So it's a busy beat.
Okay.
We've always looked at vulnerable populations, inequality as really driving issues, as well as policy. And I think as a radio station, we have a unique opportunity to really highlight personal stories and bring them to our audience in that person's own words. So that's been a lot of what our kind of focus has been. Just before COVID-19 sort of took off in the US, we were talking a lot about accountability and taking a deep look at state turnaround models and kind of saying it had been 10 years since this landmark education reform was passed and in Massachusetts. So we wanted to take a deep dive and see what was working, what wasn't about that, what were the implications for families, and have it be storytelling that was deeply rooted in those school communities. And, it's something that is still a burning question. I think there's a lot of questions about education reform that we will definitely get to, but this moment, even with just online learning, it is these rapid reforms and adjustments happening on the fly. So I think our team in many ways is very well positioned to deploy and kind of tell these stories of how the most vulnerable students are affected.
Yeah, and so, education is definitely one of the major stories with COVID-19, but, as you said, the schools are closed right now, students are home, teachers are trying to do remote learning. So how does this affect you finding the news and reporting on it right now?
It's a challenge. We have all been working from home for almost a month now. And in the last couple of weeks, the station has implemented strict protocols. If we are to go out in the field, we have to get approval from an editor and from the news director and have a lengthy discussion about safety protocols. And the main driving question is, do you absolutely need to go outside of the house to get this story? Can you get it another way? If this is the only way to get this story, how can you do it safely? And there's a lot of innovation around that. Having phone conversations with people where they walk you through their day, they describe their scene. So that's a challenge because we're used to being on the ground, observing firsthand and asking those questions and telling that story. So we have to rely on a lot of people. I feel it most when I think about, as we had said, that inequality is the big issue here. We've known that our school systems have huge inequities because our society has huge inequities. And this is breaking it open like a chasm. Yeah. And so I keep thinking, well, if schools are having trouble reaching kids who are vulnerable, who don't have stable home lives, who are homeless, how can we reach them? How are we going to get access to them? How are we going to be able to reach the student and the family that don't have internet access? How are we going to reach the family where they have the, high schoolers watching younger siblings and can't do coursework, and, the mom or dad, the parent is either not able to kind of function maybe mentally in the state that everyone's in, or has to go to work and continue going to work out of the house. How do we access those people and those stories, and how big is this? And I think that that's always a question that we're trying to figure out how to do that remotely. Because that's, and I will say, I think that every school leader that I've talked to is most concerned about that as well, and is working to do that. So it just requires a little bit more thinking outside of the box about, how do I track down the person who can connect me, who would tell that story, who would be able to put me in touch with this family in a safe way? Because we know that there are school staff that are dropping off diapers at 10 o'clock at night and that are going to great lengths. And we also know that there are families that haven't been in touch with and haven't been responsive to schools at all. So, it's a challenge, but honestly, it's why so many of us get into this work. So we have to figure it out.
Absolutely. And the inequity in education is obviously something that was a huge national story before COVID-19. And as you said, it's just being magnified right now with who has access to internet, who can actually be doing the lessons that the teachers are sending. So are there other themes that you're following right now during COVID-19 in regards to education that have really been illuminated during this pandemic?
I mean, I think that's the main one. There's so many stories to tell and that we can tell, but we've been really deliberate that all of our editorial discussion and decision making is around, how does this tie into inequality? Mental health is another big component that we are looking at. So, our team has done really great reporting about families of students with disabilities and how they are struggling because they get so many services delivered through schools, and now they have to try to figure out how to get it remotely. And that's just a huge change and a challenge, for a kid that may not want to be plugged in. I think mental health is a real concern. I'm thinking of a montage that one of my colleagues, Carrie Young, did of teachers just talking about what life was like now. And one teacher, who's a special education teacher at Cambridge Ridge and Latin, said, if you don't pick up the phone, how do I reach you? And if I can't reach you, what's going on? Like, are you having a bad day, or are you in a severe depression? They don't know. Fred Tice, who was usually doing a lot more politics and some higher ed. He's now full higher ed with us. He's done a lot of connecting with students who are worried about college loans and how they're going to pay off those college loans and what the employment prospects are going to be.
Now, is everything that you're approaching with the lens of COVID-19, or is there room for any other news right now?
There's not much room now. I mean, we're either at the beginning of or in the middle of the surge, depending on how you look at it. And it's not clear when things will even start to loosen up, let alone get back to whatever the new normal is going to be. I think that, this is driving and affecting every single person's life in varying ways and to various degrees. So it's what we're doing all the time.
Absolutely. And what really does make a very meaningful story for you during COVID-19 right now? I know we talked about these themes, but what other aspects are you pulling out right now for your audiences?
Yeah, I think in many ways this has heightened kind of and clarified the values that we bring to our storytelling and our news judgment, and the sense of purpose about why we do this work and why these stories are important to be told. So it's not a huge shift, it just makes it more immediate. And I think we used to have more room to say, yeah, let's do like a really policy heavy piece, and we'll do something that's like a little lighter. And I think now we're still paying attention to, are there moments of joy? This isn't, all sadness and all hopelessness, but getting a little bit of balance and tone there. But, I am most driven by and most concerned about the most vulnerable students, and thinking about whose perspective are we not hearing and how can we hear it? And for me, that means that almost all of our stories really have an emotional core to them. It is what's at stake for this person, for this family, and for us as a community writ large. If we can't figure this out, are there going to be even bigger learning gaps among different student population? Is there going to be a mental health crisis? Because all I keep hearing and seeing is that, yes, some are able to function better, but I think overall, nobody's all right. Everybody is stressed and overwhelmed and trying to figure this out, and they're worried. And I think that's, any parent and any student. And I think that's where the mental health kind of aspect comes in for me. I just keep thinking about, we know that schools have delivered these wraparound services to students in so many ways. Some really well, some do it really well, and some it's harder and they have unique challenges. But when the schools are closed, where do those families turn to? And they all of the families need help, whether because of the economic uncertainty of this time, let alone anxiety about the illness itself. So, that's where I kind of derive my meaning and my purpose. And as a mission-oriented person, it feels like such an honor to be playing some kind of role in doing this thinking and trying to do this work to deliver it to our audience.
That's great. And truly, as you said, looking ahead, we don't know what the fallout of this is going to be. But, looking ahead to the future, hopefully kids are going back to school in the fall. And is this a storyline that you and your team have even started thinking about, or how closely will you be focusing on that in the coming months?
Yeah, I think we're thinking a lot about short-term and long-term, and it isn't clear what things will never really go back to being the same. And we know that some universities are coming up with contingency plans in case they can't come back in the fall, in case they have to start in the spring semester. Everything is just very fluid. So it's definitely something that we are thinking about and trying to figure out what are the most pressing issues when they come back in the fall, and what does that look like? Even trying to get from districts, what does the attendance rate kind of look like now? What % of kids aren't connecting with you in any sort of remote way, and what are you doing to try to reach those kids? So, it's something that we're trying to wrap our head around without forecasting too much, because I think you always have to ground it in some reality. And I think that, especially as a public radio station, we try to be just calm and give analysis, not to kind of fuel anxiety, but really break apart what is happening, what is going on, what can we expect, how and for me, I just always think, what does my audience need to hear right now? Like, what are the questions that are bubbling up, and how can I approach that and provide those answers?
Are you sensing any COVID-19 fatigue yet from your audiences, or this is still the information that you need to be reporting on and that they are absolutely tuning into?
No, we haven't gotten any sense of fatigue from this story. I mean, I think general fatigue of kind of life, but our audience has been strong and growing in spite of everything that's happening. Typically we get about 50% of our listeners through the car radios. And even though people aren't, there are changes in those patterns because of listening habits. But, I know that our audience is very, very strong and engaged online and on air. And we've been getting a lot of really wonderful feedback about what we've been covering and what else we can cover. So it feels like everyone's kind of coming together in a really nice way.
That's interesting. Have you been changing any of your online or on-air content because of the, shifting of people's normal habits?
No, not directly. I mean, I think that we are just producing a lot of content
Mhm.
and sharply focusing it and constantly thinking about and eliciting feedback of what it is that people want to know. I think observing, is there a confusion out there? I mean, especially for our health team, they're doing a lot of Q&As. They're doing sort of daily updates on air about the latest press avail with the governor.
Mhm.
So I think, like always, we're always trying to assess and respond to what our audience is looking for.
Absolutely. And then just lastly, on a personal note, I know you have young children. How has this all affected what you do as a reporter and how you're working from home with your team?
Yeah, I think like every parent, it is a roller coaster, to be
Mhm.
honest. There are some days that it is really, really hard. And yet I am reminded constantly about the fact that we are so privileged in my house. I have a very committed and supportive partner. We have a 4 and a 2-year-old, and we have stable housing. We both still have our jobs, even as we're trying to work from afar. So we have health insurance. So I don't know how people who are in other boats are functioning or getting out of bed in the morning, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what I keep bringing to my work. I mean, the nice thing about having the 2 kids, yes, it makes it way harder to actually sit and edit a piece, but anytime that my 4-year-old is really having some strong emotions, I in some ways it's so much easier for me to remind myself to be empathetic, because I think I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I'm really mad that
Mhm.
school is closed and that you miss your friends. Like, I'm sad that we can't hug one another. Last night before bed, he was asking me if one of his friends would be able to come to his birthday in September, and if they would be able to hug, or they'd have to stay apart. So he seeing him kind of try to process this,
Mhm.
it's also a good reminder to me that I need to pause and do my own self-care, and to take breaks where I tune out. I say, like, I'm not available from this time to this time, and I'm fully present with them. And that I try to think about, how can I sustain this for myself over
Mhm.
the long term. I mean, sustainability just is kind of the main word that I keep coming back to. And once again, I'm just reminded about how fortunate we are that I'm in a position that I can even do that I
Mhm.
can step back and hit pause and be present. And it makes me even more driven to tell the stories of those many, many people who cannot, who have a child that has very high needs, and they don't have the support, and they don't have the financial certainty or stability that our family has. And
Mhm.
that's why that has to be the focus, because that's who's going to be affected the most. And we don't know for how long, but I think it will be devastating for many, many families.
Absolutely. There's a lot of unknown. It's a lot about balance right now, but thank you so much, Kathleen, for sharing what your team is doing and the amazing work that you're doing of sharing the education stories in the Boston area and what's happening with COVID-19. And hopefully we'll have some happy days ahead, but really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Danielle. As I keep telling my 4-year-old, we will see each other again. We will hug each other
We'll
again.
hug each other again. Yes.
Exactly. We'll be
Yes.
able to have drinks in a restaurant again.
Wait for that.
We just don't know when. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was really an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. It's great speaking with you.
Good speaking with you too.